welcome back to my channel. My name is Kate, and today I'm going to be doing a tag video. I was recently tagged by Evie in the Parks and Rec tag video that she did with a couple other booktubers, so thank you for tagging me, Evie. I have not done a tag video since I did Mid-Year Freakout, I think, a while ago, so this will be fun to do. I actually am a pretty big fan of Parks and Rec, although I will admit that I have only seen 5 of the 7 seasons. I am notoriously bad at actually finishing TV shows. I have several I need to catch up on, but I did really enjoy the first 5 seasons of Parks and Rec. I love pretty much all of the characters in that, but I guess if I had to pick one who I think I am the most like, I would like to say April, because I love being sarcastic, but I am nowhere near bold enough or witty enough to be April, so I think I'm probably more of an Ann Perkins. I love helping out my friends. You may notice, if you've watched any of my other videos, a slightly different angle today because my dog has claimed my chair, and I don't like to make him move because he has bad knees, so it's just gonna be a new spot today. Moving on to the prompts. The first prompt is for Leslie Knope. I adore Leslie. I'm probably gonna have side comments about all these characters because I can't help it, but Leslie reminds me a lot of my mom, actually. She had kind of the same type A, very optimistic, very hopeful attitude. So there's a lot about Leslie that makes me think of her, which obviously makes me inclined to adore Leslie. But the prompt, as I get sidetracked, is a strong female lead character, and there's really only... I have read many books with strong female lead characters, but I have to pick the same book for this prompt every time because it just has so much personal meaning for me. And that is specifically Alanna the First Adventure, although really I feel like you could use any of the books from the Song of the Lioness quartet by Tamara Pierce. I have a deep love for Alanna because growing up, I like seeing women who are capable of saving themselves, and as someone who enjoys sword fighting, I loved seeing the main character, Alanna, goes off and she basically dresses as a boy because girls aren't allowed to become knights. They're only, basically, they go into training to become ladies and marry well. And she ends up trading places with her brother because her brother wants to go be a mage. So he goes off to be a mage, and then she basically cuts her hair and pretends to be a boy and goes to school to become a knight. She has to work really hard. One of my favorite things about Alanna is that sword fighting is not something that comes easily to her, so she really has to put in a lot of time and effort. She's also really small, so she gets bullied by other people and really has to prove herself, both to herself and to her friends. She was stubborn, she was dedicated, she was very independent, she wouldn't let other people take care of her. She wanted to be able to take care of herself, and those are all qualities I aspired to as a kid and aspire to now. So I just deeply love this character. If I ever get a tattoo, it's going to be Alanna. So yeah, like I said, this is near and dear to my heart. I love this series very, very much. So I had to pick Alanna for this one. I will try and be less long-winded for the other prompts. The next prompt is Ben Wyatt, a character that you can see yourself dating or marrying. And I was trying really hard in these prompts to limit myself to only listing a book once and not listing the same book for multiple prompts, but I couldn't do it for this one because one of my favorite love interests is George Cooper from the Song of the Lioness series. I'll get into spoilers, but the reason I love George is he's this scoundrel thief type character. He doesn't try to do anything for her. He respects her as an individual, and he kind of, through the course of the quartet, you really get to see him be both friend and potential love interest. I really appreciate that George lets her do her thing while trying to do what he can to support her. And I'm a sucker for scoundrel types anyway, so there's a lot about him that I really loved. The next prompt is Ron Swanson, who's one of my favorites because he's so grumpy and it's so great. A character that you didn't think you would end up loving. Prompt doesn't really fit Ron Swanson for me because I liked him pretty much immediately, but I won't get into that. So this one was an easy choice for me. I'm honestly kind of surprised I haven't seen him mentioned yet. And that, I mean, I guess it's maybe because it's somewhat of an unpopular opinion. And that's Senlin from Senlin Ascends. And I know that whether or not you enjoy Senlin Ascends is entirely based on how annoying you find Tomless Senlin, and whether or not you can kind of tolerate some of his naive decision making, and how often he gets himself in trouble with that kind of decision making and sticking to his moral code regardless of anything else. When I started reading Senlin Ascends, I normally can't stand main characters that make stupid decisions all the time, and he really frustrated me at the beginning of this story because he constantly made these decisions that I was like, what are you doing? Why would you do that? That's obviously not the right person to trust. What are you doing? And so he was really frustrating at the beginning. But the way that Bancroft writes this, you get these flashbacks to Senlin as he was in the village, and before he and his fiancée Marya ended up going to the tower. And that really humanized Senlin for me. He went from being this character who makes ridiculously stupid decisions, and then you kind of get to see him as he was in the village, and for me, it showed that he was kind of this somewhat anxious, but like really just someone who struggles with interacting with other people appropriately. He's not close to very many people. He loves his job, and he loves his books, and he loves his alone time. But the part that really clicked Senlin over for me was there's a section where he's talking to some of the villagers, and he ends up giving them random facts about their like day-to-day jobs as a way of interacting. Like, he just clearly doesn't understand that that's not really inappropriate. You don't go to a fisherman and tell them like the science of the oceans. Like, A, they either already understand it, or B, they don't care, they just want to do their jobs. But he just, like, that kind of barrier between appropriate, like, social interaction is something that I identified with, because I tend to be somewhat socially awkward and I'm not as bad as Thomas Senlin, but I had a lot of sympathy for a character like him who kind of struggles with, like, how to interact with people. And it made it more compelling to me, the whole journey through the tower, because he's stuck in a situation that is the worst possible place for someone who isn't great at interacting with others and isn't great at understanding other people's motives and like whether or not you can trust them. That's the worst. The tower is the worst possible place you could be for someone like that. So it gave me kind of a sympathy for him, and I felt probably at least by halfway I was completely on Senlin's side, and even when he was making dumb decisions, it was kind of more like, oh buddy, than it was, you complete gormless fool. So, like I said, I grew to love Senlin pretty quickly. Next prompt is April Ludgate, a grumpy character that is very lovable, and this was an easy prompt for me. I'm a sucker for grumpy but lovable characters. It's nearly a buzzword at this point. And the book that I picked for this is one that actually would have worked for the first prompt, strong female lead character, and that is Thorn from Half the World by Joe Abercrombie. I didn't love the first book in the Shattered Sea trilogy, which is what this comes from, but Half the World completely changed my opinion on the series. I still need to get to the third one because it came out, this was the most recent one when I was reading it, and then I just never got back to reading the series. But this is the book where I feel like Joe Abercrombie finally does the prickly female character justice. I don't think he did an amazing job with that with Pharaoh in the First Law series. And in Half the World, Thorn is this really prickly young woman who is basically just trying to become a warrior. That's all she wants. First they try and guide her away from it and suggest that she should be doing other things. And then they start trying to exclude her without technically excluding her. And then it eventually escalates to where she is accused of murder for something that happens in the training ring, and it's only the intervention of a character who showed up in the previous trilogy, Father Yarvi, that gets her out of that trouble and kind of gets her onto this new mission where maybe she can actually prove herself as a warrior. And the way that Abercrombie handles the fact that Thorn is prickly, very stubborn, she's very independent, like almost will cut her nose off to spite her face. She's difficult to like, but at the same time, I really empathized with her, and I really wanted her to succeed. It softens Thorn as she figures out, like, you can interact with people in a way that's not just rage. I really, really love this book. I know the YA series, this Shattered Sea YA series, doesn't get as much love as First Law, but I really think Half the World is one of the best books I've read by Abercrombie. I'm a huge fan of it. Andy Dwyer, a character that seems to get in a lot of trouble. So I ended up picking Vasya from The Girl in the Tower specifically, by Catherine Arden, but kind of Winter Night in general. She's growing up in medieval Russia where there's this blend of older magic with the emergence of Christianity. And in The Girl in the Tower, some of the choices that she made in Bear and the Nightingale kind of come home to roost. And she starts to see some of the consequences that go along with defying gender and societal norms in kind of medieval Russia, and while she's not necessarily making a bad choice, there are consequences for the choices that she makes, and the life that she chooses to lead. There are choices that Vasya makes that end up landing her in pretty hot water throughout The Girl in the Tower. I really loved the way that Arden had kind of set up Vasya's character in the first book, and then really gave Vasya a ton of character growth in The Girl in the Tower, and you really get to see her not only see the consequences for the choices she had made, but see how it affects some of the relationships in her family and kind of how she struggles with that and how she deals with that. So I'm a huge fan of this series in general. It made me immensely interested in basically everything Russian, but I really love how committed Vasya is to being herself, and regardless of how much trouble that lands her in. The next prompt is Anne Perkins, a character that you would like as your best friend. And to be honest, I struggled with this one a little bit more than I feel like I probably should have. There are characters I like, but I couldn't really decide on which type of character I would want as my best friend at first, until I remembered about Lady Vintage in the 9th Reign, and I'm a huge fan of this. I've not continued with this series yet, but I adore Vintage. She's kind of like a lady scholar, basically. she's trying to track down the history and the secrets of this race that has historically been a serious issue. And I love vintage because she's very snarky and yet really welcoming. She's just very kind to people, and she tries to help people out and also help herself. And I just appreciate the way that she interacts with others. She often makes fun of people as often as she welcomes them into her group. And I appreciate that kind of dynamic. That's something I've always enjoyed, is friends making fun of each other back and forth. And you know that if you were friends with vintage, you'd be on all kinds of crazy adventures and you would never be bored. So I'd love to go on adventures with vintage, but even if she would get me in some pretty hot water sometimes, I think. The next prompt is Gary, Jerry, Larry, Terry, Gergich. Poor dude. Which is a book that you don't really care for. Ah, man. This one is probably going to get me in some trouble. So the way I chose to interpret this prompt was that it's a book that I don't love, but not necessarily a book I hate. And for this, I am picking Grave Peril by Jim Butcher. I know a ton of people love the Dresden Files, so I'm certain I'm going to make people sad with my opinions here. And I guess, sorry, not sorry. So I read the first couple books in the Dresden Files, and I got really frustrated with Harry Dresden because he routinely does things that land him in hot water, and most of the time they're things that could have been solved if he'd actually gone to talk to his friends, or if he'd thought about it for more than 5 minutes. And Grave Peril was the epitome of that. The things that happen in there, the choices that he makes, I just wanted to shake him. His impulsiveness and his inability to trust the capable people around him killed me. It is the closest I have been to throwing a book. It made me DNF the series. So I might go back and do the audiobooks in the future, but the world building in the Dresden Files is amazing. Dresden drives me crazy. So that's my pick for a book that I don't care for. The next prompt is Donna Meagle, a book that was spoiled for you. And for this one, I've been complaining about this a fair amount. You might have already heard this opinion, but I had to go with the introduction in my copy of Dune, which spoils major elements for Dune Messiah and some of the following books. The introduction is written by Frank Herbert's son, Brian, and I think he went in assuming that, of course, everybody has already read this, so he's giving an overview of how Frank Herbert had developed his Dune series, and also how it was received critically. And I thought it would be fun to kind of see some of that, but I was not expecting him to just drop major spoilers for the series in the first book. I learned my lesson about reading introductions, thanks to Brian Herbert. So the next prompt is Chris Traeger, a character that is dealing with a lot of emotional baggage. And I struggled with this one a little bit until I remembered a series that I loved in high school, and I definitely want to go back and reread this because there's an adaptation coming. I don't remember the name of the series, but the first book is Magic's Pawn by Mercedes Lackey, and oh man, the main character is Vaniel, and he's growing up in this kind of provincial, I think it's a castle, but basically provincial lord's estate, and his father has very specific ideas about what a man should be, and they mostly entail how good that man is as a warrior and as a strong, masculine, macho type of person. And Vaniel is basically, he's very similar to like Dandelion, Dandelion, Yaskier, depending on how you want to name that character. He wants to be a bard, and he loves music and doesn't love being a warrior. He wants some of these other things in life, and his father is completely unwilling to accept that, and routinely tries to shape Vanyel into the type of son that he thinks Vanyel should be. And then when Vanyel starts to show signs of magic, he ends up getting shipped off to his aunt and ends up getting trained by her, but it's such an emotionally impacting story because this poor kid is just trying to be himself and is completely unaccepted by his dad. It's one of the first times I can remember seeing a gay character in a fantasy series who was the main character and who was extremely sympathetic and accepted outside of his own outside of his father. Like, there's no sense in the story that being gay is wrong. And I think, I want to say this was written in like the 90s, I'll post a correction, but it really is such a sympathetic story and such a positive portrayal of the character of Vanyel, despite all the crap he has to go through from his father. It has its faults now. Like, looking back, there's definitely some elements that would be less acceptable in a current fantasy, but I love Vanyel and I love that story so much. It's fucking tragic, but I absolutely adore that, and I definitely want to go back and read that soon. So Vanyel has a lot to deal with, but he's ultimately an awesome kid. Then the last prompt is Tom Haverford, a character that has a lot of swag. And I was kind of torn on this one because there were multiple ways to go, but I ended up picking a character who, there's a reason she has swag, but I picked Granny Weatherwax, and specifically Granny Weatherwax in Lords and Ladies. And the reason I picked that, because I know a lot of people have picked kind of very arrogant, very like think the world of themselves type characters. And I picked Granny because Granny is one of those characters that pushes everybody around. And she's always convinced she's right, and she's trying to basically bully people into being better. She 100% will show up to a magic fight and shove your nose in the fact that she knows way more than you. This is barely a trial for her. You should just get out of her way now. It's just, it took me a long time to grow to love Granny, and Lords and Ladies is the place where I finally did. But she's definitely one of those characters that she knows how awesome she is, for sure. That is the Parks and Rec tag video. This is probably, even with editing, gonna end up really long and rambly, so if you made it through, I appreciate it. Let me know if you are a fan of the Parks and Rec show. Let me know who your favorite character is, who you think you would be, and if you want to do this, please feel free. Editing Kate here, and I realized that I did not tag anybody at the end of this, so I just wanted to actually tag some people, and I don't know if these channels are fans of Parks and Rec, but I feel like this is one of those tags you could have fun with even if you aren't a huge Parks and Rec fan or haven't watched the show yet. And if you haven't watched it yet, please do, because it's a great show. But I'm going to tag Amanda from the Reading and Writing Life, and I'm also going to tag Anitha. I'd love to see you guys do this one if you feel like it. If you don't, no worries. But this was really fun, and I appreciate being tagged in this. Until next time.